Welcome to the SEO Insider with your host, Seth Price, founder of BluShark, taking you inside the world of legal marketing and all things digital.
Welcome, everybody. We're thrilled today to have Chris Dreyer, the founder and CEO of Rankings.io. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Seth.
You know, we play in a very similar fishbowl, and I love to compare notes. For me, my story is slightly different, but the same. We've ended up in a similar place. Let's talk a little bit about where we see things currently. We're in an unusual crossroads of time with local service ads coming up, and we both have worked heavily in the organic space and the predominance of paid with LSA. Talk to me about where you see things currently right now in the state of legal search.
Yeah, when it comes to, dominating that first page result, you've got even less real estate when it comes to organic now due to the local service ads. And there's some debate there on, how much value they provide. And in some markets I'm in, where there's not a ton of competition, the clients are doing really well. And there's all different strategies with, what you're going to dispute. Maybe pain and suffering is not on there because it's a little subjective. But yeah, when it comes to the state, you've got local service ads, you got your Google Maps and paid, of course, and Google Organic. And it just looks like, I know they're making adjustments, but organic, the real estate shrunk just a little bit more again.
Every time,
service
right?
Ads. Mm-hmm.
I saw a picture of a speech I gave probably like 7 years ago, and Guy took the photo and he quoted me. If you're playing organic, you're starting at number 9, whatever it was at that moment in time, and it just seems like every year it's just one further down. But having conversations internally this morning, the organic traffic compared to the cost of paid clicks, there's nothing like it, and the ability to create content, collaborating with links, that there are things you just can't get or likely afford to pay for in the paid arena.
I totally agree. You could write one landing page and it ranks for 2,000 keywords. And how much traffic can that one page bring in, and how much is that worth compared to pay-per-click? Pay-per-clicks is so saturated with competition, and they drive up that auction, those cost per clicks, and there's just a lot of opportunity for organic still.
I'd love your thoughts on this, because something I've sort of thought about over the years. Do you see certain areas, and I'll share with you what I mean. SSDI, to me, and I'm generalizing, is one of those areas that paid seems to be almost advantageous to organic. I know there are examples, and I'm sure you have a client that's done well with organic, but across the board, to get the meaningful numbers, are you seeing that there are certain practice areas where, where certain ones, the majority of which I see on the B2C space, search dominating, but certain ones where it may not be the place for first dollar of input?
Yeah, definitely. And I think SSDI is a great example, long-term disability. There's also, even from the other practice areas like criminal, family law, compared to, say, personal injury, where it's going to be $200, $300 a click, no matter how you're manipulating the system, unless you're going after these extreme long tails or shoulder type keywords. Yeah, so I see SSDI is a perfect example that you could get a low cost per click, low cost per acquisition. And I think many companies have that so processized where they can still get value off of those low cases.
Yeah, and one of the things, I guess, I sort of looking at it from the legal end, when I see the people who are calling in, I mean, right, that the people calling in, I don't want to call them less rational actors, because I don't want to be harsh, but there are people that are in different states, so that, somebody in family law, while they could click on an ad, you want people, and I've always said this for criminal and family and other fee-for-service areas. I know you primarily focus on PI, but the idea in the fee-for-service areas, you need somebody who has the smarts to have accumulated the money, or know somebody with money to pay for services. And so that there's, I think, the sort of inherent advantage to organic in that you're getting people who can discern, not that they're making it harder and harder, right? Like if the shading of the ad and the size of ad, don't be, do no evil, and yet those ad nomenclature is getting smaller and smaller. PI is one of those interesting areas where you get both, right? You have people that have nothing, and you also have very smart, savvy people. What are your thoughts there? You've done a really good job in a lot of very difficult markets, getting the organic space. and then all of a sudden you're like getting pushed further and further down. How do you balance that out, and how do you play to the person who's not just getting there because you're there and hitting the phone number, which I love, but actually getting somebody who's looking at the words on the page?
I think it's a great question. I think the copywriting is more important than ever. A lot of times you hear people that oh, they're never going to read this long form article. Well, of course they're not, but they may transition to the middle of the page to a particular section that they care about. And I think that in some cases, I think if you're a soft tissue, you're taking soft tissue, any injuries, well, probably the individual isn't going to do their research. They're probably going to think, oh, they're going to think more about a level of convenience and think about, who's available, who can I go to that's close. But if we're talking about you lost a limb, then that individual is probably going to do their research and really read the reviews and take the time to hire the right attorney to get maximum value.
Yeah, and like not all of them, some won't, but a good percentage will, where you can get your piece. And it's funny, as you say that, it makes me think of something that I'm sure is the bane of both of our existence. It is content, right? It needs to be high quality. It needs to be great. But I started this with a law partner who, if I gave him a brief he wrote last year, he'd rewrite it himself. Like he'd take his own stuff and rip it apart. So I certainly am not going to get anybody on the outside that's going to write something to their liking. How do you balance? So for me, again, going back to the early days, I could write something that was so keyword stuffed, it made no sense, it was nonsensical, but it ranked really, really well. Obviously, those days are behind us. But how do you balance out the need to get volume, both in page production as well as length, and at the same time get through attorneys whose sensibility is, hey, this isn't, I don't love it, even though it may be quote unquote high quality content for the purpose of Google?
That's a great question. That's a pretty loaded one here. So
well, I live it every day. So I'm just sort of commiserating more than putting you on the spot, because I don't have an answer to it. So I'm throwing it out there how you balance it.
Well, several years ago, a 500-word article, you could throw it up and target a keyword properly and rank on the first page of Google. And now you've got so much competition. And I think that there is a balance where through a proper content marketing strategy, you need to hit all areas of the funnel, top, middle, and bottom, where those top, that's drawing them in. They're a broader audience, and middle, you're answering questions. It's that like phase, know, like, and trust. And the bottom is the practice area pages. And the thing that I've seen is the shorter the query, it's really difficult to define intent. So if someone types car accidents in, we don't know what they want. They could want any number of things. So you need to write a longer form piece of content to cover multiple area of intent, so that you just happen to capture that the person's needs, versus if it's a long tail query and the intent's defined in the query, what are the steps I need to take after a car accident? Well, we know what that person wants. So I think it's a balancing act. I think that there's a combination of the long form content and the short content. I also think that any link acquisition strategy, a lot of times you need to have content that's topically related to the sites that you're reaching out to. If it's a tech site, you need to have a tech blog on your site, or else you're never going to have the opportunity to acquire that link. Same for health, fitness, whatever it is. And so it's just a very rounded strategy. It's very difficult. It requires an expertise for sure.
And so, and like, there's also this back and forth between, yes, you're writing for all those different possible meanings of car accident. At the same time, you just want to come up. That's, at the end of the day, if you don't come up, you don't even have a shot to be heard. And there's that back and forth between, I think Google's done objectively a good job in this space of pushing the user's interests with the algorithm. Like that seems to be contrary. If we pivot to this, it seems they've really shat the bed on local, where they just have not dealt with spam, and that all of these awful techniques are working. And that for people who are, look, I know your team and you guys put a lot of time and effort in, and then some schmuck comes along with an exact match spammy listing. It's beyond frustrating to sort of, you're dealing with the largest, wealthiest organization in the world, and they haven't figured out a way to get rid of local spam. It's just, beyond frustrating.
It is so frustrating. And, a few years ago, we had the exact match domain kind of rush where everyone was buying a keyword domain, and Google came in and they throttled it back. But that was an interesting, but to be fair, I'll let you go with this, but that was an interesting one, because they did throttle it back, right?
But then like 2 weeks later, they realized they throttled it too far because
Right.
some legitimate, and so they're like, okay, we're getting rid of one-page domains with exact match. But if you have a real domain, which I had a bunch of these, like one of my first sites was DC, Criminal Law DC. They like for 2 weeks it was bad. No, oh no, this is an authoritative site. We went back. Why is there not a 5 review minimum? Something that sort of says, hey, we're not going to allow this nonsense to sort of permeate us. And again, I know that legal is 0.1% of their overall world, but they know where the revenue is. They're making real bucks from this space, and then allowing that spam to stay just seems criminal.
I wish I had the answer. And everyone talks about all of these fake GMB listings, right? It'll be a dumpster, and it'll be a law firm, right, with a keyword. And then that's how these lead gen companies are operating. Well, the quickest way to fix that is to fix the benefit of the keyword in the entity name. You reduce that, then a lot of those lead gen sites have to go the legitimate route and have to get reviews, have to have a good website. So I don't know why it's taken so long. Maybe it's I just have no clue, and I wish I had the answer, but it's just unnecessary. It's unfortunate that if you're a legitimate law firm, you now have to play the game. You have to file a DBA, you have to file a fictitious name, and if you really want to compete in these really major markets.
Because we've seen one in a major market where we represent somebody who's not at the top. This is not who's not at the top of that food chain, and other people that I know are paying $30,000 plus a month in resources. We've been able to knock out. And again, this is just how they built their business. It wasn't like a malicious thing. They happened to have just, who would have thunk that nomenclature would have that much of an influence? And and in one sense, I get it may be hard because in certain areas those terms mean something, but at least have something that is at least a legitimate business that's competing. Right. What I see the flux of spam, and that they really, again, there's been articles written about it, so it's not like it's not on their radar. To me, beginning of our conversation about how you have paid and you have organic, this middle land is so valuable. And people spend their time with posts and reviews and photos and videos. You've done all this hard work, and then you get some numbnuts who come in, and it seems like it's the ocean. The faster you get rid of it, it just keeps coming back.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's unfortunate. I think you and I, BluShark and now rankings, we're not only having to do things the proper way, we're also having to combat spam. We're having to go into our market and figure out who's violating the terms of service. And it's even a different level of tactics that's a necessity now. So yeah, it's unfortunate. And the local map pack's the best organic below the page. It's the best position. It drives a tremendous amount of search volume, and it's super high intent. Those individuals that go there, request directions and make a call, are more likely to hire an attorney than just going directly to the website in many cases.
Have anything that you sort of have seen, like, it's so funny, I go back to like a Mike Ramsey talk, I think it was at Moz a couple of years back. He was doing experiments by hitting driving directions to a Google My Business just to see if that would drive it. Anything you've been playing with where you're like, that's sort of moving the needle these days? What are you liking?
Yeah, the biggest thing that we've been playing around with right now is our copywriting for our title. I know this sounds a little age old, but we've really been experimenting with copywriting and in the title and in the meta descriptions and anything that can manipulate a click through. And so that's why I'm a huge fan of working with firms that do a lot of TV and media spend, that have those brands, because if they rank in the second or third position, it can influence that click through. And I just think that those UX signals, they're just weighting much more heavily. I also think that that's why individuals are writing longer form content, because Google can't see if the consumer is happy and has a smile on their face about what they read. What they're going to measure is the time on the page versus another page for the similar query. So anything that's manipulating user activity is something that we're really interested in.
That's fascinating. Just Google can't tell whether you're happy. They can't tell how long you're on the page. It's with all of that user experience piece, we're likely to see some big changes next year. That's everything we've got signaled. If you were to bet on 2021, user experience is what they seem to be looking at pretty heavily right now.
Absolutely. The content length continues to go up, and I just think that they're going to have to change something. And at the end of the day, one of the frustrations for us is identifying a unique selling proposition for the firm, or how are they different. Because if we write an article for Car Accident Lawyer and everyone's citing from the same source or structuring it the same way, well, who's going to win? Who separates the gap? So it's like, how can we be different? I know it may pass a copyscape or plagiarism tool, but is it truly unique? Because it's Google's job to filter out duplicate content.
Right. And then the question is, but to a certain extent, that's what somebody wants. And that's sort of that pull and tug. Now, again, all sorts of stuff you can layer on top with internal linking and external links and all of that. But that's sort of the irony, that if you are giving somebody what they want and it's sort of filtered down, it may not be that much different, at least at the highest level, from others. Is it doing more? Is it, over the years, we started with blogs, reduce the regurgitated news blog to higher quality blogs. What are you liking these days, as far as if somebody said I have X amount to spend, do you do the elevator pages, skyscraper pages, whatever you want to call them, or do you put like larger page count in? What are you favoring?
Yeah, and I know if Guy was listening, he would be saying links.
Yeah,
That's their
wait, links are links. So we're talking what's
yeah.
content.
Oh, so for content, I would say, if I had a limited budget, what I would do is I would approach their existing content and just improve it. That's what I would do with a limited budget.
No, right. And I'm saying, like, okay, if you can either create X number of 1,000-word pages, or you could make 2,500 word pages. Do you think that there's a number that like enough's enough at, that like we pound our chest as SEOs, but at some point it doesn't matter? Because I always look at the numbers, like X number of things that rank have these non 500 word pages on them. Is it cause or effect? Like, is it because those people are doing all the other things, or is it because those pages are so long? Is there a point where like nobody's really reading that whole page anyway? Google's got to know that if they see the scrolls. Does it make sense to have that?
Yeah, I definitely think there's diminishing returns at some point. If it's a particular, if you're going after Car Accident Lawyer, staying in the PI space, and all your competitors has a 4K word page, I mean, well, you probably need a 4,000 word page to really compete. But if it's a long tail query that's, the intent's really defined, then I think 1,000 words. And I do think that if you don't target unique keyword segments, and you continue to create content that's low value and thin, it can actually hurt your overall performance. It's going to dilute that equity. So I think everything is going to circle back around the quality. And that's also why, if I had a limited budget on the content side, I would take the pages that are already ranking and I would add that 1,000 words. I'd make those better.
Couldn't agree more. Although I'm always torn, because if it's working, don't break what's fixed. But at the same time, I get it. And that's, to me, I think more and more there is a diminishing point of return, but not just for page length, but page count. That, again, it's like pruning the tree, and every time you prune, you seem to improve it. You had touched on something. I wish that every one of my clients had a TV budget that was bringing that in, because you're right. The recent core algorithm updates clearly gave an advantage to TV advertisers. That said, not all of our clients will be on TV. Are there things that you have seen, whether it be paid social or other techniques, that can be used to offset it? Because there's certainly an advantage to brand. How can somebody who's not on TV try to at least ameliorate that advantage for the TV players?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's anything that you're doing for advertising. At the end of the day, is you're trying to attract attention. And I think being consistent with your brand identity is important. In my opinion, I think YouTube advertising, it's very low cost. You can be very specific with your targeting. Social media, because that's where individuals congregate, and it's really understanding. It really depends on what area of the law you are. If you're a divorce attorney or a criminal attorney or a personal injury attorney, like, you want to get in front of those individuals and where they're congregating. At the end of the day, I think that brand is just incredibly important. You have to have a brand, whether you're doing that with TV or you're doing it billboards, or you have a different tactic, a thought leadership, your education, maybe a podcast. I think it's going to be more and more important.
No, look, and I get that, but let's, there's an ironic twist based on the prior part of our conversation, right? You create a brand, which is generally in the law based on names. Again, maybe generation 2.0, they are getting the keywords into it, but then all of a sudden that brand is not what's winning the day in the three pack. So you're sort of like,
Right.
two steps forward, one step back. Again, you can place there, but it is just one of those great ironies of the space that there's no doubt that brand wins the day, but unless you're over that hump, and for clients that are stuck in the middle, that can be the most painful place because you have a brand, but it's not as established as others, and you don't have the keywords.
I 100% agree with what you're saying, because you got to play the SEO game if you really want to compete with a digital strategy. And yeah, it's an unfortunate consequence that you have to do this to really compete with local SEO if it's in a competitive, saturated market. In some areas you don't, and that's great. But and again, I think it ties back to the name thing that you mentioned, right? Is most firms will have the individuals, the ownerships, the name, and the firm, and it's harder to advertise, and utilize those keywords especially if the firm incorporates multiple partners. What's the firm in New York? Gare something. I can't. Their long. Their names is just extremely long, and I couldn't imagine incorporating accident injury lawyer or attorney or law in those to get that benefit, just because it takes up so many characters.
Right. That sort of pull and tug along those lines as far as balancing. Something I've talked to prior guests about. If you were around long enough ago, you sort of got smacked down by the sort of overseas link exact match domain concept, right? That was exact match anchor text. That was all the rage. Got shut down very effectively by Google, right? There was no mistaking about it. It was a bad thing. So for those of us that have lived through that, you're sort of scarred from that. You saw the damage that could take place, and therefore we've morphed into a much more, there you go. We've morphed into a much more conservative approach, knowing that the people you work with have FU assets. It's their baby. They can't just burn it if you screw it up. I always use the analogy of a contractor you might hire for your house. If it's your house and they're unlicensed and they do some electric, so what? But if you do it for somebody and somebody's paying you, and then you put the unlicensed guy and the house burns down, it's on you. It falls on your head. It's never
Right.
worth it, right? So you have to do it clean. That said, if you're competing against people that are using the unlicensed contractor who can do it for pennies on the dollar because they can come in and quickly wire this and they don't need to pay for a licensed electrician, that sort of pull and tug. How do you look at when you see, for example, let's use the concept of percentage of anchor text. We went so white hat or so branded that I'm now seeing daylight where upstarts who didn't live through that first generation are sort of like diversifying anchor texts enough that it works. So it's like a lot of things. How do you balance out that knowledge that you can't go over the line? At the same time, there are people now pushing further and further.
Well, so the penguin algorithm that you're referring to hit hardest in 2011, and I learned firsthand. I was holding up a coffee mug for eZine Articles, which was a site that many individuals utilize to manipulate anchor text. And the interesting thing is, it comes down to if the anchor is justified, in my opinion. And what I mean by that is, if somebody's referring to the company, you could expect that the name of the firm would be linked to the homepage. If you're talking about Amazon, for example, you probably wouldn't link to an internal page. You'd probably link to the homepage. But if you're talking about shoes that you're buying on Amazon, you probably talk about the name of the shoes. So I think that there's all these strategies that come into place in terms of anchor text, and the same for a firm. So you're talking about the firm, you're probably linking to the homepage or the about page. You're talking about maybe the service, maybe you do talk about wrongful death attorney. So I think there's a balancing act. And I also think that a big change is occurring. It's Google's job to filter out crap and duplicate content. So even from your external directories, whatever you want to call it, editorials, guest posts, at the end of the day, all that is, no matter what name you call it, is external content. That's all it is. You can call it a directory, a guest post, an editorial. It's just putting content on somebody else's website. And now it's even more important for that content that's external to be high quality and to have those links justified, so that there isn't this weird activity that when they come to your site, they completely bounce because it's not relevant. So I think that all these things are coming into play, and anchor text and doing the white hat link building is just so much better from a long-term perspective.
Understood. I guess it's the pull and tug between, that, like, look, if you do it one way, you're bulletproofed.
Right.
Right. No doubt. But I guess every once in a while I wake up and say, whoa, this term should be ours based on authority, maybe a second tier term. And then you're like, why is this upstart getting success? And then trying to figure out, like, back in the day, there was a 5% rule, right? You could have 5% anchor text or keywords in your page of content. So I'll go down to 1%. I've sort of used a once per paragraph max. Google knows what you're talking about. You have it, you talked about title tags and descriptions and things like that. Those can sort of reinforce what, the question is, Google has, talking about Guy always talks spam works. That's what, short of links, that's his second catchphrase. And it is the frustrating part, because I think as SEOs, one of our responsibilities may be, you look at all the things that are spammed. And if you go back to like Matt Cutts and you look at guest bloggers, right? Go back one generation ago where he said, there were guest bloggers and there was sort of signals, don't do it. And Matt Cutts, no, you can be a guest blogger, just it can't be crap. And it's sort of like commenting on blogs. You can comment on things, it just better be real and relevant. And so I feel that many of the things that it's like anything else, if it's done in moderation and legitimately, but it's when you abuse it or extend it, the problem is the market doesn't know how to stop.
100% agree. And it's about the consumer. Google wants to serve up the best results for the consumer, the good comments, the good quality. It's everything. I think it's Google's job to serve the best result for the consumer. And all their algorithm updates that they make, that's what they're trying to fix, is to get rid of the spam. And so I think I 100% agree with you. If you go the longer term route, so that's why when everyone's freaking out with algorithm updates, if you're doing things the right way, I don't care that there's an algorithm update. No,
in fact, you like it. To me, every time that happens, except for that one crazy one where they dumped everything upside down overnight and it came back the next day. Other than that, with these updates, if you're building the fundamentals, and I've seen your stuff, you're doing it. Like if you take that stuff and you have the high quality content and you're not playing the game, those will theoretically, each time it filters out somebody who's playing the game. And that to me has been the only positive of all those ups and downs. So I used to fear algorithm updates. And now I sort of appreciate them, because if I see something wrong, like I'm not doing as well for something as I think I should, the next update generally resets it if you sort of have a sense of the market.
Yeah, completely agree.
So the new sort of trend, if you're checking your emails and your LinkedIn, is the incessant guest blog posting nonsense. It's the new hottest, it's everywhere, at least in our little myopic world. Your thoughts, because it seems that, look, links are still important, but it's like anything else. If these guys are selling to you, they're selling to everybody. How do you sort of like navigate the world? Because you want to make sure your clients keep up with high quality links from relevant places. At the same time, when you see these mass emails coming from every corner of the globe, which is kind of reminding me of 2011 again. Yeah. That Google, if I'm getting this email and you're getting this email, Google's getting the email. And what do you, how do you sort of make sure that you're keeping people in play while at the same time not adding additional risk to what are these massive networks?
It's a great question. The biggest thing that I've seen, and I kind of touched on it earlier, was not even the quality of the content on the external site, the guest post, when you're guest posting for someone. We've had to make huge adjustments, and it's driven up our costs dramatically, because we want the content that we produce on an external site to have the ability to rank, drive traffic, and be crawled. So I think that, even if you got a site from a high authority site, a DR90 or DA90, and everyone would love that, But if the article on that page is 200 words and it's real thin and it doesn't get crawled, I don't think it's going to pass that authority back. So
basically, but what you're saying is we're now, if you're doing it legit, it's a double whammy. You can't just say post whatever you want, put my link on it.
right.
It's like I'm now creating content, not just for my own properties, but for those properties coming in. Are you going so far now as to, this is something people talked about, but then link building to the third party site to get back? Or is that, if something is a DR 90 or God willing, let's say it's a 70 or 80, that you're like, leave well enough alone, it's getting enough internal juice. How far back do you find that you need to go to get value?
So I know a lot of SEO specialists will do the kind of tiered link building approach. And at the end of the day, it's just so costly to do those types of strategies that we're really just trying when we do an external directory. If they allow 8 videos, we do 8 videos. If they allow 20 pictures, we do 20 pictures. We're trying to make them do that extra 1% to make them high quality. And we're hoping that if that external content's really high quality, that maybe it will attract some natural inbound links or get some crawling activity. So that's where we're really focusing. It's challenging in the legal vertical to create, linkable assets. Everyone loves saying that word, these linkable assets, field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. Well, the reality is you still got to do the outreach. You still got to find the consumer that would care about that piece of content.
It's just tough. I mean, look, and then is the juice worth the squeeze? Because if you took that's, again, this is sort of the piece, and I'll go back to like a Mike Ramsey, whose business model has historically been, he's been very transparent on it, like an hourly model internally, which is not mine, I assume is not yours. That, when you look at something like that, and while you could theoretically hit pay dirt, you're now looking at things where you're sort of working on spec, which again goes back to, if it's an internal asset, if a law firm has a paralegal and they're writing stuff and it's their own internal piece, then it works or doesn't work great. But for companies like yours and mine, we're being looked at for ROI, and all of a sudden the stuff that really is awesome, and if you do it, is the most elegant and sustainable link building, that be given the risk that you're sort of looking almost like a TikTok video. You can make 20 of them, it goes nowhere, and that 21st hits, you just don't know where it is. So when you're doing it at scale, to me, that's one of the great frustrations as an agency owner, is that you're not credited for a really solid attempt that doesn't work, because if somebody wants those pay dirt places, it's going to take multiple swings and misses before you hit the right one.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And creating those linkable assets are very, very costly. What goes into them, whether you're getting the data from the Department of Transportation or whatever data source you're getting it from. And I think the statistic posts are probably one of the best assets that you can create for a law firm. And so one of the things that we've been doing is we've been hitting those with a little bit of paid traffic. So we'll create a statistics post and not go the organic route, actually pay for traffic to them. And we got this strategy from Tim Solo over at Ahrefs, and to have them work as a link building mechanism. But it's all cost. It's where you're going to apply it, whether you're going to build a linkable asset and do the outreach, whether you're going to do the outreach to guest post, or put in the time for a robust directory, not just that has the name and address. It's all time, it's all cost. So it's a balancing act.
I'm sure you've looked at stuff and you said, man, it would be a lot easier if I just owned this asset and controlled it. And then you're like, it's sort of like a company deciding whether they want to, build a business or buy a business. It's the same type of thing.
Yeah.
You're going to pay one way or the other.
Absolutely. Roland Frazier has he's partnered with Ryan Dice and has done all these acquisitions, and he teaches a course called the Epic Challenge, and it's all about acquisitions. And it's really made me reconsider my approach to SEO. It's like, well, this site already ranks for that phrase. Instead of me trying to write an article and try to hope that it ranks by doing link building, by creating this high quality piece, well, this one already ranks. I wonder what they would pay to sell that asset, or what it would cost to buy that asset as a strategy itself too, because it's just virtual real estate. And it's really challenging in the legal verticals, particularly those bottom of the funnel. Everyone wants, wants those. But from a link building, from a marketing component, you can look at those top and middle of the funnel blogs or associations or things like that you could potentially purchase to use as leverage for your marketing strategy.
No, it's fascinating. And you go back and forth, right? Because you're like, well, it'd be easier to do it. Then you're like, well, I really don't want to put all my eggs, because then all of a sudden you have all your eggs in one basket. And that does, so that there's but you also look at like what FindLaw has done, and the fact that they are, love them, hate them, what have you. It's amazing how much they've been able to shape off of a single site, moving the needle for enough people. Because if they want to, if they have a customer they want to retain for some reason, and it's off a single domain, which is counterintuitive, right? If you were teaching a class to a bunch of college students, you'd be like, okay, don't count on too much from a single domain. But they really have done a pretty remarkable job of sculpting and getting, when they wish to, really moving the needle for people.
Yeah, and I did a study recently, and I think that at the time, the highest amount of referring domains, I think, was Morgan and Morgan. They had like 6,000 referring domains at their site. And then you look at like Avo and FindLaw and Justia, and Justia's and FindLaw's got like millions of referring domains. I'm not sure the exact total, whatever it is, but it's significantly larger than any firm owner. Well, that really highlights the fact that Google's still heavily weighting those link building signals for the search results.
Yeah, right. Because that's been the most, sort of, as we sort of come to a close here. I mean, that's been the most frustrating thing, I think, as we go from paid to local to organic. Okay, you're down to organic, right? You're the right answer. You're the number one player in the market, or top 3 player, and you want them to be number one. If you take that asset and you've done everything you're talking about, you should be playing for one of the top 2 spots. And the idea that FindLaw, Super Lawyers, Justia, NOLA, whatever it is, that all of these other directory sites, which is not a great user experience, people are going there, and, right? It's a terrible user experience, but that we're still, and to me, that's always how I know I'm doing a good job, is that when those directories are pushed down, like when I have I think then directories, then competition, that's as good a day as I'm going to have. So, but the sort of, you scratch your head again, which is, you're right, it's links that, Avo and Conrad were genius back in the day to include the link in the badge. I mean, I just thought that was like one of those, why don't we just slice the bread? I mean, they're genius moves, and that's how you end up with 20x the number of links of anybody else.
Yeah, and you see expertise doing it. You see FindLaw just doing all the acquisitions and utilizing their Thomson Reuters, their legal hub to acquire all those links natural from those citations. It's hard to compete if you're a small business owner, for sure.
And again, that's just sort of one of those, now as a law firm owner, you always look at this is one of the things I've never quite come down on the side of yes, but it's frustrating when you look at, there are directories, right? No shortage of directories you can go to, and a lot of people have talked about those. But then you have sort of the paid directory, and the idea that, in theory, if you're getting case value from it, great. But that's becoming like sophisticated people, especially out of the plaintiff space. The smart money who's going to be able to afford somebody is likely not going directory. Likely. Again, there are exceptions to every rule. Right. Plaintiffs work where you don't need the revenue up front, little bit better, but that you end up in situations where the directory costs, when charged on a monthly basis, which is great for the Thomson Reuters business model, makes it so that you want the links, but that it doesn't make, like, you then, it keeps us employed, because if it was easy, everyone would just pay Thomson Reuters and it'd be done. But if you're paying that much and you're not getting ROI and you have to justify it for links, you're like, well, yeah, it's a good link, and I would love it, but I could emulate that in 7 other places for a tenth the cost, because they're not pretending to be lead gen, and be able to sort of sculpt it. And I think that is sort of one of those areas that I think has been sort of the most fulfilling, is that it's like the puzzle that we have to put together, which is, how do you not just get the links they need, but at a resource, forget about not buying links, but just, as you talked about, the resources it takes to get a link, and figuring out, are you allocating it towards these amazing assets and then pushing those to other people? How do you do that? I wish you could just write a check, but I guess if you could, then we'd be out of business.
Right. It's a challenge. It takes it, and it's different for every market, as you know. I mean, in some markets, FindLaw and Avon, those directories are dominating. And it's a different level of competitiveness versus maybe a smaller market, a smaller DMA. The other thing that's interesting too is when you look at these third-party directories and you compare them directly just to paid ads. Let's just compare them to paid ads. Well, FindLaw, they'll sell you a year agreement for a fixed rate. Well, what if they don't rank anymore? You're still paying that fixed rate. And
no, I hear you. And and then the opposite is some stuff on the come. You see certain stuff where you can get in early. I found this, like I got some early super lawyer listings, and it was good, right? And they were like, forget links. I'm sure are fine. They may not be as good as FindLaw, but they're still solid links. But I was able to justify some lead gen from it. So I'm like, okay. And then that combination is great. But then the moment they get any juice, then the price goes to the sky, and it's sort of like it becomes the permutations that you almost feel like you have to be like a Vegas odds maker to figure out, what is the thing, because every lawyer has been locked into a FindLaw agreement of some sort at some point, and there's nothing worse than like buying into something and then not having any love from it later in the contract.
Yeah, I completely agree. They handcuff you. And the other thing is those sites that they sell, and they slap the FindLaw in the footer, and they're just building their network up. And it's all the work that, that firm owner buys a FindLaw website, and then they hire an SEO agency that does great work. Well, they're just filtering all that equity over to FindLaw's properties. It requires a significantly greater amount of expertise than it did in the past, just because of competition and all these things going on, and tools like Ahrefs, as you know, and SEMrush just being a necessity to accurately scope a project.
No, absolutely. Well, this is great. I think we could go on for hours. I hope to have you back, because this is a lot of fun, and I'm sure that none of this stuff is going anywhere, and there'll just be some new challenges in 2021.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Seth.
It was great. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the SEO Insider with Seth Price. Be sure to check back next week for fresh insights into building your brand's online presence. Episodes are available to stream directly on BluShark Digital's website.